guys. Let me open us up in a word of prayer, and we'll get going. Father, we come before you and thank you for the wonderful privilege of gathering together to discuss ways that we can love our people more. I pray blessings upon each person who is here in the room today. Thank you, Lord, for their commitment. Thank you, Lord, for their faithfulness to this work. And we pray that you would be amongst us. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, we're going to be talking about some issues related to boys and men. I want to, as we get started, let's see if I can get this to work. Okay, accessory allowed, good, yes. Yes, good. I don't have any conflicts of interest to disclose, so we can move on beyond that one. Just a little bit about me. I am a clinical psychologist. I'm the Chief Behavioral Health Officer at an FQHC and Community Mental Health Center in Franklin, Tennessee. And we serve mostly the rural poor who are in that area. I always like to show people my family. They are probably the best part of who I am. This is my wife of almost 26 years, up there on the right-hand side. My two kids, Jasmine and Gavin. I got to officiate my daughter's wedding to that guy that's over in the picture, her new husband, our dogs. And I show this last picture to you of 4 generations of Mallot men in there. My son is a lot bigger than that now, but in the picture with my dad and my grandfather. This topic, I show you these things as well. This is a relevant topic for me, not only because I am a male, but I remember when my son was born, it became sort of paramount to me that I'm like, I gotta figure this stuff out. How can I love, how can I care uniquely for him as he is shaping into a man? And so this is not just me as a psychologist speaking, this is me as a dad talking through this, and as we speak a little bit about this topic. Our goals, our objectives for today, hopefully we can accomplish these, is 1, to identify the interconnected physical, mental, educational, social, and spiritual challenges facing boys and men. To analyze the barriers such as stigma, cultural norms, intersectional dynamics that limit men's help seeking, and discuss how faith-based, culturally informed strategies can address those issues. And then 3, to discuss practical strategies that can be implemented in and around community health settings to improve outcomes for boys. I want to give important acknowledgement at the beginning of this topic, as the political sphere right now is different and has changed a lot. And I want to say that as we talk about ways that we can support boys and men, this doesn't have to come to the detriment of also acknowledging the injustice and inequities that have occurred throughout all of history. We still have wage and opportunity gaps there, where women still are making less than men, underrepresentation by women in leadership. Before Title IX in 1972, there was a lack of educational access, and still there are some barriers globally that exist today. Certainly health and safety disparities, particularly we have outrageous numbers in regards to domestic sexual assault and reproductive health, and then certainly globally around the world there's a lot of injustice. And I put this out here because I believe that we can actually hold both these things. They can be important to us, that we still advocate for the rights of women and also find ways to improve the very current poor outcomes that are going on in boys and men. Can we all agree to that? All right. So why does this matter? I want to play a little clip for you, but there's an interesting television show that came out on Netflix recently called Adolescence. I don't know if any of you have heard about that, but it is a series about this 13-year-old boy who ends up murdering one of his classmates, female classmates. And it goes into this sort of masculine culture that has started to exist out there with where there's a narrative in that women are somehow responsible for men's feelings of loneliness and rejection and despair. And so I just play this clip from the news about this show. Well, we're going to skip the clip. This culture that is being defined right now, we'll talk about that a little bit later. I don't have the video clip for you guys, but it doesn't tell us a whole lot more than I can just tell you. That there is a lot of movement that is going on that is a representation of deep-seated, growing feelings of despair that has been occurring in boys and men throughout the last generation or so. And what that has caused is in many a belief that someone else is responsible for this, and so we need to do something with that. And they are not entirely wrong, and that's where some of this is important. We know that some of the outcomes, that lifespan is on average across the board about almost 6 years shorter than it is for women. The percent higher suicide mortality is 267% more, despite the fact that women on average report depression 4 times more than men. There's a 79% higher mortality by accidents, speaking to a lot of the risk-taking behaviors that men seem to be a little bit more comfortable with. Certainly higher mortality by disease, by stroke, and to put the icing on the cake, that they are 20% less likely to actually have a PCP. When we look at these issues, when we look at the mental health outcomes, we know that depression prevalence is reported less in men than women. Anxiety is reported less. We don't know that it's actually experienced less, but it is reported less. Substance overdose mortality is 2 times the amount. We have 2 times the amount of ADHD diagnoses. In boys versus girls, conduct disorder is diagnosed 3 times more. Autism spectrum diagnosis, 3 times more. So I first want to open this up and say, what are some of your guesses as to why this is occurring? Right, and we see definitely that actually just within the last few years, we've realized that there's actually probably been an underdiagnosis for girls of ADHD for many years. Absolutely. Conduct disorder and ADHD are very externalizing disorders. We know that boys are by far suspended and expelled far more than girls. The educational system, is very different. And we know that actually, when it comes to we'll talk a little bit about the educational stuff, but the way that we teach boys is we teach them the same way that we teach girls, but not necessarily recognizing some of the differences in different learning styles. Let me ask you this. With men, and you guys brought up the fact that there probably is a lot of underreporting of depression and things. What are we supposed to look for? Like, what are some of the hidden signs that you would see depression in men that might cue you up to say, hey, this might be something that's going on? I think it's really important that we talk about that there's significant racial disparities that occur that have even worse outcomes for racial minorities. We know that even though the white male lifespan is generally almost 6 years shorter than a woman's, a black male's lifespan is 6 or 7 years even shorter than that on average. We know that whereas suicide rates are generally higher with white males, homicide rates are much higher with black males as far as death by homicide. Hypertension rates are higher in black men. They also utilize mental health services both in black males and Latino males at about 50% of the rate that white males will. Suicide rates of indigenous males are about 1.5 times greater than they are for white males, and then certainly the incarceration rates for black men are much higher for white males, which is also significant because the mental health rates in our incarcerated population is significantly higher as well, where frequently they don't receive treatment. I think that it's also interesting that in looking at our the Latino males who are migrants into America, their average lifespan actually is longer. In general, it's anywhere between 78, 79 years. Why do you think that is? It's called the Hispanic paradox. Under-resourced, on the move, lack of stability. Why are they living longer? Yeah. What is it? That's actually number one. Yep. That's the community nature of it, relational. At least that's what is being estimated, right? They haven't been able to develop a causal relationship, but that is one of the greatest guesses as far as a prediction. Latino culture is awesome when it comes to community and relational connection. Something that all the rest of us can really learn from in many ways. You also see that one of the places where people in general live significantly longer lives is in Loma Linda, California, where we have a large amount of people who are Seventh-day Adventists. Two things that they've seen in the research: one, they live very healthy lives, but two, very church-focused and community-focused. They live very active lives. We also see that there's a lot of change in the way that people in general are engaging relationships. Some of this is related to social media and smartphones and stuff, but it is interesting that only 34% of single women as of 2022 were looking for a relationship, but 54% of single men were actually looking for a relationship. That creates a bit of disparity in regards to the hunting pool, right? You can get a little bit of a sense or a guess why men might get the picture somehow that women are like avoiding them, because actually there is a little truth to that, right? They're just, and we know that single women report a higher satisfaction just in general with life than men do, single men do. That was a report just of last year. And men are definitely, as of this report, men were more emotionally dependent upon their romantic partners and struggle far more after breakup than women do. And this is, the guess on this one is because men have fewer close relationships to go to. And so who do they go to? Their spouse. I'll tell you, my wife is probably one I lean on the most, probably for my emotional support. I don't feel bad about it, but I understand where, if I didn't have her, I'd have to relearn a lot. I'd have to change a little bit of the way that I engage relationship and gain that support. And this is where one of the greatest myths that has occurred is that men don't want that connection or intimacy with other people. That is very false. Men actually very much desire connection. They're just not so great at actually asking for it or finding it. Educational challenges in boys. We know that there is a lot of underachievement in schools and that this is a growing statistic. We know now that by the 8th grade, girls on average are reading a full grade level beyond what boys are. We see that this is actually especially true for minority boys, that all the way through that they're falling behind. The educational structures that we currently have, they tend to be very rigid. We noticed that actually when we hit the 80s, when we were in competition with Japan's educational system, in the 90s with No Child Left Behind and everything, what did they do? What was their way of actually leaving No Child Behind? They started cutting recess time down. and started cutting lunch times down a little bit and asking boys to sit still and learn the same way. And it actually worked against them in regards to the scores. You just continued to see scores for boys drop off. The belief here is that, without the supportive interventions, this trend probably is going to continue, unless we are actually able to do this. The rigidity has also led that there are higher suspensions and dropouts. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why this might be the case. We also see decreasing enrollment in higher education. Now, a pretty significant majority of those who are graduating from college are women. It's now become sort of like a popular joke, right? On especially Christian college campuses, right? That you'll have like a 2-to-1 ratio. And so boys feel like they've got a better shot, at finding a wife. But we also see an overrepresentation in special education services too. Boys are being diagnosed with learning disabilities, but generally more of the externalizing sort with autism, ADHD, and stuff, because there has been some prejudice, or at least stigma, in the way that they're actually observing some of these behaviors. When we look at the neurobiology about boys' development and the way that girl and boy brains are different, again, these are not true for every single human being, but rather just generally guiding principles, that the prefrontal cortex in boys develops generally 1 to 2 years later. We know now that as far as like the entirety of development, that girls usually have a fully formed prefrontal cortex by the age of 22. With boys, it's around somewhere between 26, 28 years of age. So there is a delay in the way, and prefrontal cortex certainly responsible for a lot of our higher level thinking, where we do executive function, we make our good judgments, decisions, and also have a way of being able to manage emotional impulse, aggressive behaviors, those sort of things. We also know that with the higher baseline testosterone rates, boys can be primed for more impulsivity, risk-taking behaviors. And the way that the brain is formed, study after study has shown that girls do have a more significant, a stronger neural network between hemispheres. There is just more interconnectivity wired for girls, and this is one of the reasons why, in general, they're better at processing speed, learning, language acquisition, and certainly verbal fluency. Boys do have a higher brain volume, usually in white matter, and it's usually actually in certain particular areas. There is actually some research to show that men do have some better ways of being able to attend to things like movement, the ability actually to be able to observe where they are at in location and in space. But the significance of that is a little bit more negligible. There is one area that they do consistently score higher in looking at the brains, and that's in math. Hence why there also has been a lot of emphasis in schools of trying to actually shore that up for girls and be able to bring up math scores in science. Boys, though, because of some of that underdevelopment and also being forced, I think, into school situation earlier than they might be ready or primed for, you do see a lot more externally processed emotional behavior, aggression, acting out. And so ADHD is diagnosed 2-to-1 in boys versus girls with higher rates of learning disabilities. Some of the things that they're looking at in ways to be able to compensate for some of these things is looking at how can we actually engage kids differently in learning. So looking at multimodal learning, kinesthetic learning activities, let the boys move. I remember even when my son was in the 4th grade, the teacher let them bring exercise balls to sit on. Man, it was awesome because my kid was stir crazy. And the kids got to draw on it, and they had their markers, and So he's like Pokemon and all that stuff all over it. And he just bounced all day and everything, and he did great. He actually, I remember we had to switch schools on him because the previous school, I used to get in trouble at his school. I'd go on over there and hang out with Gavin and his buddies at lunch. And they had a red light, yellow light, green light system. And if you make too much noise, it'll go to yellow light, and then you have to be whispers, and then red light means no one talks. Well, doggone it, if I didn't turn that red light on so many times, I got busted. But there is something to be said. There is it was very highly structured. We moved him to a different environment where he gets a little bit more flexibility and freedom. Man, that kid's academic scores just shot up, and his overall sense of well-being. This is where also just support for self-regulation strategies that help support the boy in learning how to just calm himself down and self-soothe. Take some of the time for that, which means implementing movement breaks, interactive learning, flexible classroom environments, so that they can channel some of the high activity levels constructively. And certainly being able to do good mental health recognition. This is one of the places where I think I think that CCHF clinics, I see this happen a whole lot, that they do well, is actually mental health screening for kids. Being able to identify things early on and be able to actually help them to access services early on is very helpful for the kids. One of the highly recommend this book, the book of Boys and Men by Richard Reeves. He outlines what he identifies as probably the number one solution that we could actually do for boys is actually start them in school 1 year later. Just as simple as that, to allow their little brains to sort of catch up a little bit. I used to think that was stupid. And even as a psychologist, I'm like, come on, that's how their brain will form, right? It is actually the struggle. But family after family that I saw that did that versus sticking it out, their kids just actually produce much better outcomes in general. Just in confidence levels, their ability to actually regulate their emotions, it worked out really well. So let me pause there. What are your thoughts? Is this tracking? Does this track with your experience? What are some of the things that you've seen either in your kids or in the schools that you've noticed that may be a barrier to the kids, your boys thriving? Well, my poor kids, their dad is a psychologist, their mom's a teacher. And so they get it from both sides. And I remember my wife, she started out teaching middle school. Woo! Not only are they rambunctious, but they're kind of stinky, right? It's tough. And I remember she'd just come home so tired. And then I remember parents would start coming in and asking the teacher to do special, different, unique, and individual things for their kid. And she's like, "Are you crazy? I'm stuck trying to just get done." So I think that this is where us being creative in our strategies to support teachers and help them in these ways. One thing that has been very helpful, at Mercy, we've got 17 school-based counseling clinics. And they were pretty good at first. The parents would sign them up for a counseling session, do all that. Where it really gained traction was the teacher just walking down the hall and be like, "Can you deal with that?" And they'd be, "Sure." And they'd go on in 5-10 minutes or whatever, just do their thing, help them calm down, do all that stuff. Man, that's where the gold was at. And the teacher felt like they were empowered to teach and do things. The kids got to learn and still be in the classroom and not be stigmatized. Man, it was so good. That's where I think a lot of our movement needs to be, is actually really trying to embed some of those services, kind of an integrated behavioral health into the teacher's workflow. Because most schools, their school counselors are way overloaded. Usually a lot of school districts only have a handful of school psychologists. It's just very, very challenging. So going even further and talking about this in the way that, sort of the boy archetype that is quite traditional that we're all aware of. It's sort of this hero archetype, I'm here as a protector, I'm the provider, I'm the warrior. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Is it a bad thing, to be a protector or to provide for other people or something? No. But it has steered a lot of people wrong, right? It's gone too far toward many times a dominating culture. And the hero myth, though, it actually, it did things for our society, right? When we went to war, it actually provided mission-focused successes, in times when our country was in despair and stuff like that. Having this myth, it actually held men together to sacrifice to the level that was needed in order to get things done. For the men, this created a sense of identity and purpose and meaning. But that has kind of been unwound, right? We've seen a collapse in this identity that was formed. We've had this script that sort of the traditional male script of hero mentality has kind of been stripped back, many of it because of the toxic nature, the dark side of it, that lent itself toward abuse and domination, the way that the treatment of women over all these years. And so it got unwound. But it creates this vacuum in that vacuum with men without a script, and this is something Richard Reeves talks about, is that boys are right now without a script. They are not sure who they are or what to do. But in that vacuum, more extreme versions of masculinity are more than free to fill in the gap. We see this, as men feel disconnected from real healing community, they will find belonging in other groups that are going to focus on being much more performative, rigid, domineering. You see a lot of this in the incel culture, or red pill movements. I show a picture here of the Proud Boys. They've gotten a lot of infamy in the last couple of years, that their belief is that the world is against me, therefore I've got to take over the world. That's sort of the mentality. And guess what? We get to do it as brothers. And this has created a whole lot of division. We've seen racism spike it's always been there and it's always been bad, but you've seen it much more acclimated, and it gets fed by, the digital culture as well. We know that the algorithms are actually going to reward and continue to show more and more of a hypersexualized, domineering, extreme versions of this engagement with young men, especially those who are socially isolated. And it's going to feed over and over and over again these same algorithms. This is where you end up, as part of the way that a boy makes meaning out of this rejection, in many ways, is that they're rejecting me not because there's something wrong with me or anything, but it's everyone else. There's something wrong with them, and I've got to fix that. And one of the biggest ways that they do that is to dehumanize the people around them, right? If I can just turn them into objects, then I don't need to necessarily feel disconnected from them because they're just an object. So this is where Christian healthcare comes into play. This is where we have a responsibility, I believe, to fill this vacuum. In a place where this is not happening very frequently. So just to kind of start with, why distinctly Christian? So one, we know that faith-based healthcare and connection to religious community, spiritual engagement, spiritual disciplines has big healthcare benefits. We know that research shows that when the healthcare aligns with the patient's core spiritual values, adherence to medical recommendation improves, Patients report higher satisfaction and overall well-being. There's a 62% decreased risk of completed suicide. There's better adherence to psychiatric treatment. There's the normalizing of emotional vulnerability, greater self-forgiveness, 37% reduction in mortality, lower risk rates of depression and anxiety, improved coping with stress. Jesus is good, right? The work that we do is important and actually has an actual effect that the world can take notice of in what we're doing. Additionally, it also creates a sense of identity and purpose for the boys. They are able to actually see, in many ways, their doctor, who is someone who's filling out the hero script in a very healing and open way. This has been one of the most wonderful things that I've had in working side by side with physicians. There's so many times, man, a person doesn't necessarily come in and say, I want to see a psychologist, right? I mean, it happens sometimes, but they're pretty cool with seeing their doc, you know? They'll see him and everything. And I'll tell you, aside from my wife, my doctor probably has seen me in my most vulnerable moments, right, above anyone, right? There is power in that, life-changing power in those vulnerable places. If we're actually placing Jesus in the midst of all that, those people begin to be able to see their identity and purpose as defined by Jesus instead. I also think that, you know, having this this alternative approach, that there is a deep need for all of us to belong and to matter to someone. And this is most especially true with minority groups who have been systemically oppressed, who have been rejected by the system, that we see throughout structural violence and racism throughout all these years. And to be able to have the ability to have someone who's there with them in their vulnerable moment and to treat them with dignity and to provide them with excellent health care in the midst of them while providing them with dignity and praying with them, that is transformative when that actually happens over and over and over and over again. It's a contradictory message. Then they are getting that the world is against me. Instead, you're starting to see like, well, maybe the world is against me, but there sure are some people who are for me. And that's a message that can take on some power. This is also like being able to hear from people. You are worthy. You are loved. You are made for purpose. Let's help you figure out what that is. This is where I think that our healthcare as distinctly Christian is transformative and carries a lot of power. And for us, we also have the opportunity to model a redeemed masculinity that's actually mapping onto Jesus and what we see in Jesus. And that's, you know, Jesus, I think, from Scripture, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are. This empathic Jesus. And right now, empathy is actually on the battlefield right now. Empathy right now is being defined as bad, even in Christian circles. That is not the messaging that the Bible has. It's not the messaging that we want in our healthcare system. So let's look at solutions. Like, what are some things? I'm going to just kind of scan through some ideas that are being done, around the country at different places to kind of give you a sense of what are some of the actionable steps that we can take in terms of several pieces. So one part of this blueprint for Christian men's health is integrated healthcare. So we know definitely that there's a huge stigma. Men are not going to seek out help readily from a lot of other people. It's funny. So I work in primary care context, and I go in and see patients while they're on the exam table and everything. And it always feels like I'm a ninja, right? Like I kind of like, the doctor leaves and all of a sudden I'm like, "Wah!" And I jump in there and, "Hey, you feeling sad?" And I don't do it quite like that, but there's ways that we do that to try to get around that. But what we're going after is we're actually trying to go against the stigma that's there, that men just don't want to go to the doctor, they don't want to go see a shrink, they don't do all that kind of stuff. So what we do is we try to get them with everything while we do have them there, and make it as easy and convenient as humanly possible for them to get on in there. So the comprehensive strategies for what our offerings are important. To be able to offer male-inclusive strategies, one of the, as boys and men, as part of their script and everything, very goal-oriented, enjoy being able to sort of be project-focused and everything. So the way that I've worked it out with a lot of the men that I have is, men seem to take really well to SMART goals. They're like, okay, that's concrete. I know when I can get that done by. And they do like it a little gamified too. Like, okay, I'm going to get a reward. So that's where it's really helpful to have their wife with them, or their mom, or something like that. Or they're kind of looking and say, okay, what reward will I get? If I get my blood pressure down, it works, it works. Same with routine health and wellness screenings. This is one of the reasons why we do all the 5 bajillion forms that we've got on in there, but they do serve a purpose, is trying to actually scan the whole thing, and hopefully someone somewhere says and is willing to circle on a little piece of paper and something to the effect of, yeah, I need help. It actually does work. Screenings do work for mental health, for health issues, and being able to check on these things. Men, we still see colon cancer rates going up, despite the fact that we've actually picked up in a lot of screening opportunities. They can't quite figure it out, but it is serving a key purpose for a lot of our folks. Virtual Men's Health Hub. So this is where being able to offer virtual services through telehealth engagement, being able to see also nutrition strategies, online things that are accessible by a phone, which is why interactive health technology is really taking off for men. The company HIMSS, you've probably seen a million of those commercials, right? Man, that company made out like bandits. Why? Because, guy can just go on their phone, yep, I've got erectile dysfunction. Man, I don't want to tell anyone about that, right? Click, and a little doctor online says, okay, you got this or whatever, send a medication off and everything. Well, I don't know about how excellent of care it is. I don't know. But there is something to be said about it being almost anonymous, where it's easy, and the person is able to just text their health care. There's something that we can take from that. And then certainly health incentive programs can be very, very helpful for people. This is an exemplar program that's out there called the Barbershop Hypertension Program. It was actually developed with pharmacists who would embed themselves in barbershops. The idea behind this, right, is, okay, we need a community-based intervention that is going to target black men who just have very high hypertension rates. We've got to figure out how to do this. Well, this is a cultural place of comfort, safety, belonging, is the barbershop, traditionally. And so they actually would have pharmacists go on in to the barbershop. You see the guy's got his blood pressure cuff. He's right in the chair, and they literally will get their hair cut. They got the blood pressure cuff. It's fantastic. And they actually showed really, really good rates. So their systolic blood pressure on average went down 26 points. In the test group, whereas the control group is only a reduction of 9 points systolic. So that's actually quite significant. The p-value was below 0.05. It was a significant study. It was good, and they saw one of the biggest things is medication adherence went way up, and their trust for healthcare went way up because it came to them. That was a big one. And I think something that we really can learn a lot from. For community and peer support initiatives, I'll focus on a couple of these. One of them is just the intergenerational membership. I don't have it on here. Darn it, I forgot. I have a good buddy of mine. He is in Memphis, and he was a teacher at Manassas High School. And he is notoriously, Manassas just has just a huge dropout rate, a lot of violence on the campus, that sort of thing. And he decided that he was going to do something about it. Well, he loved two things, basketball and chess. And I remember him telling me about this and he was like, "I'm going to teach all these kids chess." And I'm like, "Vincent, what? Like, I don't think they're going to like that, dude." Well, to this day, he'll have like 100 kids all out in this giant chess tournament, and these kids are genius level chess players. Like, I went in and played with a couple of them, and they wasted me. I mean, it was amazing. But then what he does is then he pulls in older Christian men, who are playing chess with them, and the whole time they're mentoring them. He's established this mentor relationship, and it's awesome. You have these guys that are giving their lives to Jesus, and he's had really, really good results. The program's blown up so much that he's now having to, seek out a lot of donations because he was draining his bank account trying to keep this thing going. And it's really shown just that boys want mentorship, they want leadership, and they also they want someone who looks like them too, has a shared experience, who understands it. The last is sort of the educational and preventive programs, in that a couple of the things I'll mention on here is certainly that we talked a little bit about school-based active learning workshops, be able to actually help and focus on creating partnership with our families and our in the school systems, being able to help them, but teach them how to do conflict resolution, but teach them how to teach their kids how to do these things and work through it with them. Cultural resilience, healthy masculinity, emotional literacy. One of my favorite types of therapy is parent-child interaction therapy. We do this at Mercy, where you've got the kid and the parent come in, and the mom or dad gets a little earpiece. There's a one-way mirror on the other side. The therapist is behind the mirror, and it's the kid and the parent in the room, and the parent's playing with the kid. But the whole time, the therapist is actually teaching them how to guide through all these processes, how to discipline their kids, how to actually respond in healthy ways to understand their emotions. And we're starting to do this in schools as well, to be able to help with them. Another interesting kind of exemplar is this group, Men in Mind for Improving Therapy for Men. And it's this group that is out there to train therapists better and healthcare providers on how actually to work with men specifically. So it's online training for mental health professionals mostly. There are some for medical professionals as well. It's focused on better engagement with their male clients. The modules cover, depression, suicide, et cetera. But the research has shown that therapists in general have a lot of insecurity about working with men. They're not really sure what to do with them. And so modules like this, the therapist confidence rates went up, which meant when you're a therapist and working with a man, you don't want to look more anxious than your client, right? So this has been really helpful at actually helping to reduce the stigma associated with it and increase therapy retention. I think we're done. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate you.